Hello, I'm Natasha. Welcome back to my channel. And today I have a special guest with me, Nick Griffin, the former chairman of the BNP. Nick, hello.
Oh, there.
Hi. Could you just give a brief introduction to yourself for people who may not know who you are?
Yeah, can I just ask what proportion of your audience are Brits, roughly?
I'm not actually really sure. I think I've got viewers from across the world actually, which is quite good. A mixture of from like UK, Europe, and the US.
Okay, well, so mainly for the foreigners amongst
Hmm.
us, Nick Griffin, I was elected in 1999 to lead the British National Party, which was Britain's premier anti-immigration movement. When I was elected, it was frankly a small political joke. I turned it into an election winning machine, which gave the liberal political elite, the Uni Party, electoral nightmares for literally 10 years between
Yeah.
sort of 2001 and up to about 2014. I was elected as a member of the European Parliament. The BNP was by far the most successful anti immigration, genuine British nationalist movement in history. And although in the end we failed, in another way we opened politics up. The BBC especially blocked the British National Party by ruthlessly promoting Nigel Farage, which resulted in an immense electoral surge for UKIP, which resulted in a referendum, which gave us a Brexit, which the political elite hadn't really given us properly, but nevertheless it broke the mould of British politics, and in particular it broke the conspiracy of silence over the grooming gangs issue, which had been going on for 30 or 40 years. I was the one who really broke the story. I was really nearly imprisoned for it. And although other people since then have come in to say this was our issue, we made it happen. We broke the conspiracy of silence. Other people have done great work on confronting the issue since. But if it hadn't been for us, it would never have been in the public eye in the first place.
Yeah, sure. And I certainly think that you've made a massive impact on British politics. And talking about Britain, I suppose my first question is, what's your thoughts on the current state of Britain? Because I can't help but have a very pessimistic view about Britain at the moment, and it's almost that I don't have hope about the future of Britain, given the amount of problems that we have. I mean, it's not just like the levels of migration, both
Mm,
legal and illegal. But it's just the state of the economy. I think GDP growth was like 0.1%. The amount of debt that we have, not just as a nation, but the personal levels of debt
mm,
that people in Britain have. The fact that we have the highest energy costs in the world, which I just think is, remarkable. I mean, how can we have economic growth when our energy costs
yeah.
are so high? And I don't think it's just about the green levies. I think the wholesale cost of what we're importing, because we rely so heavily on imports, also has a is a
Mm,
factor towards it as well. And also, I just wanted to touch upon the fact that so many British companies have been sold off to
mm,
foreign investors, not just like the water companies. 70% of water companies are foreign owned now, but I think over half the big six
yeah. The
electricity
railways and so on.
providers. Yeah, and it's, I find this actually a real risk to Britain because, say, for instance, with the water companies, I think over the years they have actually just extracted the profits and they're
Mm,
not invested in the infrastructure. And now we have the situation where they are actually just, dumping sewage into the seas, into our rivers and
in the
seas. And I
rivers.
just
Yeah.
think this is just this is just too much. I mean, I cannot help but have a very negative view on what's happening in Britain and whether we actually have any hope
Yeah.
or not. I
It's
don't know.
it,
What's your take?
it's a very, very big issue, and there's a sort of a micro and a macro. So there's the position of Britain, and we've been almost uniquely badly governed with the sort of things you pointed out. You know, when Thatcher brought in privatisation, supposedly it was about spreading private property, which I would regard as a good thing, but it wasn't
Yeah.
because the shares that briefly went to members of the public ended up being sold off and hoovered up by big corporations, many of them, as you said, foreign, which just used Britain as a source of rent, a source of short-term profit, suck it dry and let the infrastructure crumble. And it's water, rail, roads, electricity, right the way across the board. Our health service, people still think, oh, I'm worried, is some future politician going to privatise it? It's already privatised, the NHS effectively. All the things that could make profit has already been privatised. So yeah, the country is a particular mess. Everyone at present is looking at Miliband's net zero craziness and thinking this is just the Labour Party. No, it isn't. The collected elected heads of Britain in Parliament voted, when they voted on the Climate Change Act, was it 1999? Only 2 Tory MPs voted against it. All the rest of them, Tory, Lib Dem, Labour, Unionists, SNP, the whole lot, voted for something which has imposed at least £18 billion extra costs on the British taxpayer every single year, and was simply designed to destroy our energy base. I've often said that if you go back to the troubles the world had with communism, in the old days, at least theoretically, the quarrel between communism and capitalism was about who would control the means of production.
Yeah.
And in the course of trying to change that, the communists killed millions of people worldwide. What we're now facing is a global elite which doesn't want to change the ownership of the means of production. They're deliberately destroying the means of production, particularly our energy base. It's not just Britain, but we've got some of the worst government. So these things are a huge problem, special to Britain in a way. But if you go far, far deeper than that, and what should really make people really give them no hope at all, if they actually believe that a capitalist system where everybody consumes as a lone individual, if they actually believe that's a good thing, then they should indeed be deeply depressed, because that is coming to an end. It's not just Britain. There's not one country in the industrial world now where our population is replacing itself. So to replace a population, the average woman has to have 2.1 children in her childbearing lifetime. If you don't do that, if you fall below that, your population will shrink. Now, if you cut out the relatively fast breeding immigrants, which we've had in waves in recent years, Britain, like Spain, Italy, France, Germany, and so on, our real population rate is about 1 child per woman of childbearing age. So our population is going to half, our breeding population is going to half, not every 70 years, but every 25 years, because that's the length of breeding generation. So we're already in the whole of the industrial wide world. It's not just the whites, it's also, Singapore, China, etc., etc. Anywhere you've got modern industry, anywhere where you've got capitalism, feminism, and the pill, basically, which is everywhere, we're facing a catastrophic die-out of the human population. Elon Musk is talking about this. Even he hasn't really summed it up. You can sum it up like this, that anyone who went to school in Britain in time when history was still actually taught will vaguely remember that in the 14th century we had the Great Plague, the Black Death, which killed off about 1/3 of our entire population. By the end of this century, we will have had the equivalent all across the industrial world of 2 Black Deaths back to back in terms of the collapse of our population. Now, especially when you've got a financial system which is basically fraudulent and based on fiat money created out of nothing as an interest-bearing debt, that will only work if you've got overall economic growth. You can't have economic growth in a country which is going to suffer, in a world which is suffering 2 Black Deaths in 100 years. So the modern capitalist system, everything we think is normal, is finished. It can't be tweaked. It doesn't matter whether we elect another Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage or Rupert Lowe or Nick Griffin to make any difference. This cannot be tweaked. It cannot be put right. So the old thing is finished. Now, if that depresses you, I think you're probably looking at things through the wrong end of the telescope. Because when you look at the alienation, the suicide rate, the destruction genuinely of our environment, I'm not talking about the climate change nonsense. I'm talking about extinction of animals, plastics in everything, and all the rest of it. Hermaphrodite frogs, because there's so many chemicals in the water, all those things. I don't believe, when you look at the sheer ugliness of a modern city and compare it with the cathedrals, the churches, the things that were built hundreds of years ago by men who'd never gone to a university for one day in their life, but they still built beautiful things. You look at the state of our society over the last 100 years, Is it really a bad thing if that goes? I don't think it is. But what I do know is that our grandchildren are going to grow up in a totally different place to that which we regard as normal.
So what do you mean by that? I guess I mean so because you mentioned like Nigel Farage, and it seems like obviously he's probably going to be the leader who's going to win the next election from the opinion polls. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think that people probably are voting for him because he's the only one that's, he's like the worst of what's out there, basically. He's not particularly like my choice, but he's the only one who's going to kind of stop the illegal migration, which is, quite a big concern for me at the moment. So are you saying that basically we're going to have a collapse of the current system of government and something to replace that?
A collapse of everything, yes.
Okay.
So, you can't, with the economic chaos that's coming, you can't have a welfare state.
No.
So all sorts of things are going to change completely. Coming back to Nigel Farage or the immigration thing, yes, I think you're right. I think he may not become the government, because I think that the collective powers of the establishment will throw enough mud at him and his party that they'll probably become the majority party. They won't actually take power, I don't think. But even if they did, and everyone's saying, I'm going to vote for Nigel because he's going to... People actually think of voting for Nigel the same way as they voted for Brexit, because they're absolutely sick of living in a country where we're second-class citizens, shrinking, and everyone understands we're going to become a minority. And everybody has therefore wanted to vote against immigration somewhere or another. They voted for Brexit to take back control. And now they're going to vote for Nigel on the basis he's going to stop immigration. Now, what you said there, of course, he didn't say he's going to stop immigration. Quite right. He's only talking about illegal immigration. But people are voting for Nigel. You can speak to anyone out there. I'm going to vote for Nigel because I want my country back. That's the crux of it. There's all sorts of things like the corruption of the old parties. There's other things feed into it. But basically, it's this gut feeling, I want my country back. Now, Nigel has said constantly that he favours mass immigration. He said, and he's pointed out from a purely capitalist point of view, that if you stop all immigration when your population's declining, your house prices are going to crash, your consumption will crash, your GDP will crash, all sorts of things will go wrong. So Nigel, basically, he's a bankster's man. He's there for the capitalist system. So he will always favour mass immigration. The only thing he's going to change is, instead of having Poles, as we used to have in the European Union days, we're going to have Pakistanis, and in particular, because he's now understood that people are really concerned about the Islamification issue, he's going to say, we won't have Muslims, don't worry, we're going to save Britain, we won't have Muslims. You'll have 1 million Hindu Indians every year instead. Because if you don't, our economy is going to crash, and there'll be no one to look after you when you're in your nursing home. So sorry, folks, you've got to have mass immigration. He's not going to change anything. He might keep out some illegals. We had this in Italy with Giorgia Meloni. She was elected as a strong anti-immigration candidate to stop immigration, save it to Italy, blah, blah, blah. And yes, she has stopped a lot of illegal immigration, but legal immigration in Italy is through the roof. So the Italians, whose birth rate is even lower than ours, are losing their country even quicker under a party and a leader they thought was going to be against immigration than they were under one of the old uniparty operations. It'll be exactly the same as Farage. And even if he did keep out every single illegal, so what? So what? Because 90% of all the immigrants utterly changing the face of Britain every single year come in legally.
Yeah,
does that help when you're becoming a minority in your own country? Of course it doesn't.
No, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at the figures, it's like approximately 50,000 coming in on the small boats, but actually our legal migration is just like through the roof. And that's if the figures are even correct, because I think they're all based on estimates. So, I mean, for me, like I trained as an accountant, I don't understand why you can't just have like real-time data showing who's coming in and out of the country. It's just...
Because they don't want us to know. And the latest example of this is just the other day. Starmer and the Labour Party, they're saying this is great. We've got immigration massively under control, because net migration into Britain has dropped to just under 300,000 a year. And people are supposed to think, oh, immigration's dropped to 300,000. It was 1 million the other year. It's so much better. That, of course, is net migration. And what the figures actually show is a net migration leap of about 1/3 of a million, 300,000. But it's only net migration because 690,000 people have emigrated from Britain last year.
Yeah.
And the majority of those, the large majority of those, are Brits of working age of 45 or less. So they're also taking their young families with them. So we're still seeing a population shift of basically 1 million a year. And that's before you take into account the illegals, who, although there's not that many, there's still, as you say, 50,000 or so that we know of, and the differential birth rate, in that even though the birth rates of all Britain's immigrant groups basically are dropping like a stone, they're still higher than ours is. So, for instance, the birth rate of British Pakistanis is now 2.4. In historical terms, that's very low. It's not that far above replacement level. But when ours is 1.4, it's a lot more than us. So we are losing this country at an incredible rate, and we are going to become a minority in our own country. I wish we weren't. You know, I've spent my whole political life, well, my whole life basically, since the age of 14, 15, politically involved, trying to oppose that. But it's where we are, it's going to happen. And no voting with a magic wand is going to reverse that. So the British people now have to hunker down to the fact that we're going to be a minority in our own country, which various people think is something utterly terrible. And in a way it is. But it's not like the end of the world. We're not going to get murdered in our beds. As long as we are an effectively organized and confident minority which insists on our rights, then we will still dominate the culture and the atmosphere of this country, not least because quite a lot of the minorities, people like the Sikhs, increasingly Gurkhas and so on, they came to Britain, all of them actually came to Britain because it was Britain. And because it was more peaceful, it was better than their countries. That was why most of the people came here in the 50s and the 60s. And many of those people actually are essentially on our side. So people coming back to the grooming thing. Oh, it's grooming. Of course, it was a wicked, appalling crime. But the biggest gang of groomers in Britain now are not Pakistanis. They're not Muslims. The biggest gang of groomers in Britain are the teachers' unions, which are forcibly teaching little children that men can become women and vice versa. And if they chop their genitalia off, they can change sex. And if they're not sure, they should start taking body-destroying drugs at the age of 8 or 9. And that's the real threat. That's the threat to all our children. And if you live in an area where there's a Pakistani grooming gang, you can look after your daughter. You can impose some restrictions and keep her safe. You could go out and look for the gang and deal with them. But there's nothing you can do when the whole elite is hell-bent on perverting, twisting, and surgically and chemically castrating your children. So in this case, the hardest line Muslim in Britain, if they're a parent, are a better friend to us and to our children than our political elite and the people running the teachers' unions. Because all those people, the more fundamentalist and religious a Muslim or a Sikh or a Hindu or even a Jew is, the more they are religious, the more they understand that what our liberal elite is doing is thoroughly satanic. And if they'll stand with us against that, then you've got to say, well, we're better off with them than we are with the people we used to think would look after us.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. Yeah, so you don't necessarily think it's a bad thing then if overall the white British become a minority in England?
I think it's a terrible thing. No, I think it's a terrible thing.
Okay.
But it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And no one can possibly stop it. So therefore we have to think, what do we do about it? And what we need to do is, instead of trying to pretend there's a political solution which will one day put everything right, we're going to accept we're going to become a minority. How do we behave? Now, we only have to look across the water to Ireland, where ever since the Reformation, when Protestantism came into being, Irish Protestants were a minority in their own country, and they were threatened with pogroms, murder, and extinction for 400 years. Have they gone away? No. For hundreds of years, the Irish Catholics, although a majority, were a brutally oppressed people. Did they go away, give up, disappear? No, they didn't. In 1922, in Northern Ireland, the Catholics became the minority. Did that mean they were exterminated, extinguished? No, they got on with their own lives. They built the Gaelic athletics associations. They built their own schools and so on. And gradually, by breeding faster, they became the majority. So now you've got the position in Northern Ireland where the loyalists are again a minority, even in their own little loyalist state. If you go to Northern Ireland, will you find a loyalist population which is cowering and whining it's going to be exterminated? No, they're out there hundreds of thousands of strong with marching bands and parades, which show very, very clearly if anyone messes with their community, there will be hell to pay. And in each of those communities, the actual community feeling and the happiness, the genuine joy that people have is far, far stronger because there's a sense of belonging. There's a coming together, there's doing things together, precisely because they're a potentially oppressed minority. Those are that's a better place to be. It's a better community than the community of either parts of working class Britain where everything's been smashed up by decades of Tory economics and the kids are killing themselves on heroin and smack. Or you go to the leafiest, nicest, poshest bourgeois suburbs where they're all doing coke because they've got no sense of belonging, no purpose, and nothing really to live for. So that's the problem of being an idle, soft, comfortable majority. And if you're an embattled minority, it's actually in some ways a better place to be. So I think it's terrible it's happened because it's got the potential to go very, very wrong. But given that we are where we are, we can make the best of it, and there is good to be had from it.
Yeah, I guess to get like the minority white British to that stage, I feel like there's quite, I feel in a way that they are quite, I suppose, I don't want to say lazy, but because obviously we have like the benefit culture in England, and we have, we have a lot of
comfortable. Yep.
Yeah, so they don't really take an interest, I'd say, in what's actually happening to the country, or it's like as long as I'm getting my my benefit money, then I'm okay. What do I care about what's going on in the country? Which I find really quite disheartening to see. But and obviously like the benefits expenses just unsustainable. We've got like something like nearly 9 million people on benefits in the UK now. But yeah, I don't feel like the British are kind of at that point yet.
Yeah, I think you're right in some ways. So on the benefits question, as you say, the key thing, it's unsustainable. It's especially unsustainable when you have a population across the industrial world in effectively free fall. So economic chaos all around. Of course, we can't afford it. And especially as what appears now to be a Trump divorce with the NATO business coming up, Britain and the United States of Europe are basically basket cases, going to have to stand on their own 2 feet, won't be able to. So I think that the comfort blanket for poor communities, the benefit system, and for wealthier communities, the middle class benefit system, namely public service jobs, it's just as parasitic. Someone's sitting in an office twiddling their thumbs and coming up with diversity operations. They're just as lazy and just as useless as someone sat on their backside drinking cheap lager, watching daytime TV. It's just parasitism for the middle class instead of the proletariat. None of it's going to be sustainable, so it's going to stop. So people will have to come face to face with the reality. But on top of that, when we were involved trying to push the BNP, when there was still time to turn this all around, which there was back 20 years ago, there's not now. When we were doing that, we did indeed come across the fact that most people were inclined to think, well, basically, I'm all right, Jack, it's not really a problem. And they were thinking our population focused around 3 words, I, me, and mine. That was it. And the population which we have to move towards will be a population focused around the different words, different pronouns, we, us, and ours. And how close are we to that switch? I think we're much closer. We're certainly way closer than we were 20 years ago, because you look at 2 things which show that the British people aren't sat there thinking, oh, basically, I'm all right, nothing to worry about, or not even thinking about it. If that was the case, you wouldn't have the 2 former parties of government on, in some opinion polls, not much higher collectively than an electoral insurgent populist party. And you wouldn't have every working and lower middle class town and roundabout in the whole of England and chunks of Scotland and Wales as well, festooned in our national flags.
Yeah.
It's the raise the colours thing and the speed with which it took off, and the way it's still there, and the way that even left-wing councils haven't dared really to take down that many flags. It's a huge change. The British people over the last 24 months have been drastically tribalised, the English in particular. And I said this to, I did an interview with quite a hardline Muslim a couple of months ago. And I said to him and to his audience, I said, people need to understand here that the British people that you are now dealing with are completely different to the British people that you grew up with.
Yeah.
There's a switch has been triggered in our people's heads. And so now people are tribalized. Now, they're not yet ready, because to become an effective community, you need, quite Northern Ireland, you need your own sports associations, you need marching bands, you need charity shops, which are just for people in that local area. You need 101 things. We need British white-run minicab services, where especially after 10 o'clock, any woman is going to be picked up by an older lady who's a driver from our community. You need 101 things like that, and it'll take many, many years for our people to develop them. But they can be developed, and they will be quicker, particularly if any actual hardcore British nationalists watching your show take note of this, that I'm saying this change, this hugely beneficial, this saving change will happen far quicker if nationalists stop fantasizing about impossible political change and just sitting there behind their computers tapping away and watching broadcasts where people repeat over and over again all the problems that we all know exist. And instead of that, they get into their communities and they start working as local community leaders to turn places from what is just a population into a place where everybody somewhere is involved in something which makes them part of the community. And it's not a pipe dream, because, say, you look at Northern Ireland, it's what's been done there by poor working class communities under immense pressure, just by themselves, because they understand they need to, because they've got to stand together. That's where the British people are, and that's where I'm immensely hopeful for the future.
Well, that's really good to hear, kind of a positive take on things, actually. And I do feel that things are changing within the country, and people are getting kind of certainly more aware about what's happening, and trying to kind of, fight for the country, really. I suppose moving on to kind of international events, which I'm also quite interested in. I just wanted to talk to you about what's been going on, obviously with the US and Venezuela. Obviously, we've got kind of instability with Iran. And I spent quite a bit of time kind of reading about the history of what's gone on, starting with like former Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya. Obviously, now we've got a situation with Ukraine. And I think this is, a really, really bad war to have kind of on our doorstep. Obviously, all of the wars that have taken place over the past 30 years or so have been, I think, terrible events, but also I don't think that Britain has been on the right side of history with what's happened. I think it's fair to say. Obviously, we wouldn't have so many migrants trying to cross the channel had we not taken out Gaddafi, who he literally warned us that Europe would become black from migration. And, this is what's happening. But I just wanted to get your take on what's happened recently with Venezuela and Iran, really. I mean, I just thought it was remarkable what they did with Maduro, just literally just kidnapping him and taking him to the US. I was astounded by the events there.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it is just another one of their forever wars, meddling in other people's countries. So you mentioned Libya very rightly, but of course they did the same with Syria. They did the same with Afghanistan. The Afghanistan destroyed over, first of all, a big power struggle when the Soviets were there, and then on the basis that an attack which was carried out, if it was carried out by the people who were supposed to have carried out, it was carried out by Saudi Arabians, and certainly the American government saw it coming, 9/11, and it certainly wasn't carried out by anyone with a connection with Afghanistan in any way, shape or form. But Afghanistan, there was issues with oil and gas pipelines, and the American military industrial complex wanted to go in and destroy it. and there's also tied into that the specifically Zionist element of world politics, wanting to destroy all Muslim countries which in one way or another are opposed to the bandit state of Israel. So you've got those two factors tying in together, and we've seen decades now of these monstrous illegal wars fought under all sorts of false pretenses. And the Ukraine war, of course, the most dangerous to us, very clearly because of NATO's ruthless and dishonest expansion right up to Russia's borders, and then the literally state-sponsored terrorist attacks for 8 years against Russian speakers in the Donbass, after a CIA coup, which is what it was in the Maidan in Kiev. So the Venezuelan thing really is just another piece with that. Having said which, there's lots of people online are saying, if you look at what was going on, Maduro was doing two things. One, he was saying, well, the oil should be ours, not America's. And then two, he was also very firmly backing the Palestinians. Therefore, people saying, so this is all down to the Zionist lobby. That's why they got rid of Maduro. Now, clearly the Zionist lobby are very, very pleased to have got rid of Maduro. Absolutely so. And they'll have been pushing for it. But I think in the end, there's a deeper thing there of the position of the United States. That America, having made the same decision that Thatcher and co did to offshore its industries to India and China and so on, America for the last 20, 30 years has only really existed as a civilized country that can afford to pay its way, pay its citizens, keep its infrastructure, and fund its enormous worldwide military presence. It's only been able to do that because of the petrodollar. Because people buy and sell petroleum in dollars, and the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So anyone historically since the Second World War who's wanted to buy and sell anything internationally has had to buy dollars to do it. And the Federal Reserve, a private banking scam leeching off America, has literally printed the dollars out of thin air and sold them to other countries for goods which have kept America up. And Maduro in particular was selling large amounts of heavy oil, which is hard to get out, but particularly valuable, particularly useful to the Chinese in Chinese currency. And that was when the dollar is already on the slide. This was it's a fatal threat. It's an existential threat, not just to the dollar, but to the United States of America. Seen from that point of view, actually, what could Trump do? What can the Americans do? If they do nothing, the Russian and Chinese bloc is simply, the Chinese have already basically taken over Africa as a resource base. They've already pushed the Americans out of, in industrial terms, out of most of the world. If this carried on, America would be doomed. So in a way, to say, what could Trump do with something as drastic as that? And I think to have people saying, oh, it's all about the Zionist lobby, and I'm a big critic of the Zionist lobby, but I'm saying here, this isn't all about the Zionist lobby. This is the geopolitics of keeping up the dollar. And for the Americans to do that, they have to do things which are bad for everybody else. Now, they're obviously bad for South America, but equally, people have understood that much about Trump's grab against Venezuela. This is good. It might be good for America. It sure as hell bad for the people in South America. Look closer to home, because what they're doing, what they've just done in Venezuela, is just the same as what they've done in Eastern Europe with Ukraine. And America, the American deep state, isn't just at war with the people of Venezuela and Cuba and so on. They also were responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was the biggest act of industrial sabotage in world history. And that wasn't really aimed at Russia, it was aimed at Germany. It's aimed at deindustrializing Germany and the European Union. And similarly, all the stuff they're doing now, it's not aimed at Russia. So the sanctions aren't aimed at Russia. Russia has benefited from sanctions, actually, because they've had to go in for import substitution for making things and growing things themselves at home. And Putin has been able to say to the Russian people, look, we've got no choice. It's going to push prices up for a bit, but we've got to do it because we can't import things because the Americans have stopped us. But the sanctions weren't therefore directed against Russia. The sanctions are directed against the countries of Europe, because to keep the American dollar high, the other thing you've got to do is, having accepted they basically lost the Far East to China, they probably lost the middle to Russia and China. What's left of the world, Britain, Europe, and a few places like Japan and so on, the only way to keep the dollar high is to suppress the other currencies. That's the pound sterling and the euro. And America is at war with Britain and Europe just as much as they are with the leftist regimes of South America. America, geopolitically, is our enemy. They were largely responsible for dragging Britain into the First World War.
Yeah.
The First World War was fought by American-based banks. Its main war aim was to destroy the old empires of Europe, which they did with the Germans, the Austrians, and the Russians, and the Turks as well. The Second World War, the American war aim, was the destruction of the remaining European empires, the French, the Belgian, and the British. And they succeeded. And this Third World War, unacknowledged, but it's going on, yet again, the target of the American elite includes us. And people need to understand that.
Yeah, I don't think America has our best interests at heart, to be honest.
Absolutely.
And I
Never
think
did have.
no, and I think the sanctions against Russia are screwing Europe up more than they are Russia. Russia's still trading with China and India. It just diverted its oil supplies to China and India, and we're still getting the Russian oil. We're just buying it through India. It's just absolutely insane. I mean, the only leader who I think has got any guts is Orban in Hungary. He continues. I think he's continued with a 10-year contract to buy Russian gas, and he's got one of the cheapest electric prices in Europe. But other than that, I think the sanctions that we have against Russia are absolutely crazy. And the whole rhetoric that British leaders in particular have against Russia, I could only just perceive as Russophobic, because Russia could literally take out London in a matter of seconds with the missiles they've got. But it just doesn't seem to register with the leaders that we have in England, the kind of dangerous game that they're playing. It is.
It doesn't. I think it's partly a myopic stupidity. And I also think there is an element, coming back to the net zero thing, there's an element here of it's an excuse. It's a deliberate suicide by Russia. It's like going up to armed cops and waving a plastic gun around. You're going to get shot dead. And the fact is that especially the Labour Party, but it's much wider than that, the whole left of the British political elite is determined to shrink our carbon footprint. That's what they signed up to with the World Economic Forum and so on. They are determined to shrink our carbon footprint down towards the level of third world peasantry. And they can't do that. If they give us a vote on it, do you accept that in the next government we're going to increase your fuel tax by 100%? Do you accept that we're going to stop you flying out to Spain twice a year for a holiday? You'll have a ration. You can go once every 6 years. Of course, people wouldn't do it. No possibility of imposing that, or even imposing those things, even if they didn't ask us in an election. Any government which imposed those things as its own policy would be out on its ear within 5 years at the most. Couldn't be done. Whereas if it's sorry, but we had to confront Russia because otherwise the Russians will be here with snow on their boots trampling through your living room, all this nonsense. And they might even stop gay pride parades in Manchester as well as in Moscow. So we've got no choice but to fight Russia. And if that means that we've got to spend so much more money on arms and so on that we have to shrink the rest of our economy, well, sorry, we can't help it. So it's an excuse with them, as well as I think just a mania that we're run by not even second-rate politicians. These are third or fourth-rate politicians. Partly just people generally are far less well-educated than they used to be. Our population hasn't just shrunk. The more stupid elements of our population have had kids quicker than the more intelligent elements. And you're dealing with a political elite which is almost across the board. They've never done a day's work in their life. They've never been involved in the real world. They haven't even studied real studies at university. And they're infested with groupthink. That's just their own thing. They will not debate with anybody else. They won't listen to anybody else. People don't read anymore. So there's not time for this. There's all this information coming at these people. They've got to make the choices, and they make choices on the basis of groupthink. And what a handful of very, very sinister, ill-intentioned people just push them to do. I've seen it when I was in the European Parliament. Saw that there. Most people just there almost by accident, really, and just sort of muddling on and doing their things. But there's these very small, deeply ideological, deeply disturbed going all the way to the level of satanic. These
Mm.
deeply bad people with their own agenda operating in a political population which hasn't got an agenda at all other than its own self-interest. And they just push through it, or they push it the way that they want to go. So you get all sorts of very
Mm.
bad things coming out as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of satanic, because I mean, look at what's going on in England, and I regard it as satanic, some of
Mm-hmm.
the things that are happening. But I mean, going back to Russia, it surprises me because I think, like with the Iraq War, for instance, I felt like the British people were very kind of clued up and
Yeah,
knew that this, this war was the wrong thing to do, and obviously had all the protests in London and things. Whereas, like taking like the situation with Russia, it feels like actually especially when the war first started, a lot of British people did support
yeah. Waving
Ukraine.
the Ukrainian flag, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like, I found that quite surprising because I thought to myself, having actually like read history and
Yeah.
things, that actually Russia opposed the Iraq War, which history proved them right to
Mm-hmm.
do. They opposed the intervention in Libya. History proved them right there as
Yeah.
well. And like, if we listened to Russia, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
it surprises me, how the British people have actually just kind of accepted this propaganda, really,
Yeah,
that's being shoved at
it's
them
it
regarding Ukraine.
surprised me too, and especially Nigel Farage is caught here. He actually is quite good on this issue. He's got a basically good instinct. It's not a war, we should keep
Yeah.
out of it. But so many of his voters are fanatical Russophobes that he's
Mm,
terrified of the idea of being painted as Putin's puppet. So even he's not speaking out on this issue.
no.
In terms of British politics, there's really only at one side George Galloway, the other side
Yeah.
me, saying right from the start that this is leading us towards conscription. It's a disaster. It's not our war. It could get us all killed in someone else's quarrel. For heaven's sake, step back from this. I think part of the problem goes back to middle-aged, middle class, the boomers,
Mm,
and we were brought up on anti-Soviet, anti-communist hysteria. Basically, you've
yeah.
got to remember anyone say age 70, they've got a vague memory back, or between 60 and 70, vague memory back in their heads of literally being told by the teacher, dive under your desk and cover your head, because that's
Mm,
what you've got to do with this, because there's going to be a nuclear war. Because of the
yeah.
Russians, because of the Russians, because of the commies, because of the Russians. And if you look at comments on, say, the Daily Mail articles about this sort of thing, you time and time again see people who actually, if you looked at their comments on other things, generally they've got it, they're pretty switched on. But on
Mm,
this, it's all the Russian never trust a commie, because they're still
yeah.
communists to them. The fact that Russia was seized by a wholly alien gang of communists in 1917 with the backing of Western banks. It was rather what the
Mm,
West tried to do, or did in the end, in Syria with Al Qaeda and ISIS.
yeah.
These are terrorists funded from outside who go in and seize
Mhm.
control of this country, slaughter millions of people, and impose their regime for a while. But under Putin, very, very clearly, Russia is now a Christian country.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
It's the most Christian country in terms of its government and so on, and its aims in the world. Still not
Mm,
perfect. They still have
no.
hundreds of thousands of abortions every year. So it's not a
Yeah.
proper Christian country at all. They would have stopped
Mm,
that. There's far fewer than there used to be. But nevertheless, so it's not perfect by any means. Of course, it's corrupt. All
mm,
societies are corrupt. All
yeah.
elites are corrupt. They're shepherds. What do shepherds do to their flocks? They look after them.
Mm,
Why? Because they skin them, they fleece them, and they eat them. So all governments basically have a
yeah.
bad element within them. It comes with the territory. But Russia is a better government for its own people. In the end, you could tell it just by looking at the life expectancy of
Yeah.
Russians when Putin came to power and what it is now. It's now 10 years higher than it was then, because it
Yeah.
had crashed under the Western looting that went on under Yeltsin. So
Yeah.
you can forget all the propaganda, because people lie, everybody lies, yeah,
Yeah.
especially when they're in power. Just look at the life expectancy, and when you get a government which increases the life expectancy of its country by 10 whole years, you know you've
Mm,
got a government which is basically doing the right thing. So for us to be basically at war with that government, and
yeah.
to be being fleeced as taxpayers, at the very least, we're going to be
Mm,
fleeced of billions of pounds, which are needed for the infrastructure of this country and education, and to pay those women who can have children, if they want to have children and so on, the money which should be put to good purposes is going to go down the bottomless pit of the military industrial complex. That's the very
Yeah.
best we get out of this. The next
Yeah.
thing is we get the continued destruction of our industry because our energy prices are so high. And
Yeah.
the worst is we will get blown to kingdom come in a world war that we shouldn't have been involved with because it's got nothing to do with us, apart from the fact that Boris bloody Johnson kept it going 2 or 3
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess with this situation with Iran, Iran has had, a good connection with both Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Russia and China are going to step in with with the potential if Trump was to strike
Well,
Iran or not? Because I think, we're in quite a quite a dangerous situation once again with
yes,
Iran, and
we
you
are.
know,
We are.
yeah, Israel and America seem intent on trying to remove the current government, forgetting like the history of the 1979 revolution. And, from what I've read, the Shah himself was propped up massively
Yeah.
by America and Britain.
Yeah.
And he was supported
And Israel,
massively.
the Mossad basically ran their territory,
Yeah,
their terror and their torture chambers for them. So yeah,
yeah.
it was. Well, first of all, what happens in a country like Iran shouldn't be anything to do with us.
No, I agree.
If they
Yeah,
want to hang drug dealers,
yeah,
it doesn't matter. If they want to hang decent people, it's most unfortunate, but it's not our job. It's not the job of British
no,
taxis. It's certainly not the job of British soldiers to go and interfere in foreign affairs overseas, anywhere.
no.
But a lot of what is said about Iran is, again, it's war propaganda.
Yeah,
And what I said about Venezuela being people overestimating the role of the Zionist lobby there, because it's also mainly about oil, etc. In the case of
mm,
Iran, it's very, very different. Iran is the one remaining regional superpower which stops the Zionist state of Israel utterly dominating the Middle East so it can do everything it wants as it establishes a gigantic greater Israel on the ruins of other ancient civilizations.
yeah,
And if there's a war with Iran, with America and Britain as well following suit as usual, then that will fundamentally be another Zionist war, just like the
mm,
Iraq war was. That's all
yeah,
there is to it. There's no financial interest for America destroying Iran. They do far, far better off, because Iran has been under sanctions for years.
yeah.
Trump would be far better off to say, you know what, we'll lift the sanctions totally, but you've got to do most of your business with us.
Mm,
And Iran would say, yeah, we'll do it. And it would
yeah,
give huge amounts of money to the United States of America. But that's not what Trump's about, because here he's doing the bidding of the Zionist lobby around him, and they just want to destroy Iran totally, because the
mm,
Yinon plan is all about destroying every other state around Israel. So it's the last man standing in the region, and then he can do what he
yeah,
wants. So it's a particularly dangerous war and a wicked war. You ask, will Russia and China really step in? Well,
yeah,
I think they should do. But
yeah.
there again, they should have stepped in to save Syria,
That's what I
uh,
thought. Yeah,
and didn't do. Now, okay, arguably Russia couldn't, because they're up to their necks with a war against the whole of
mm,
NATO, and a very
yeah,
brave Ukrainian army in Ukraine.
yeah.
Perhaps they couldn't have done. The Chinese could have done.
But yeah,
And they should have done, because Iran is an important part of their one belt, one
one road.
road
Yeah,
trade operation through to Europe and through to Africa. So they should have stepped in, and they didn't. So will they
yeah,
now? Well, if they didn't then, why should they now? Just because it's closer, just because it's more important. It's a little bit late in the
mm,
day.
yeah,
So I'm not at all sure. It is possible, of course, because they are now
mm,
dealing. This is the big boys of world politics, not the hysterical school kids like Starmer and Van Leyen and so on. It's possible that Trump and his people have basically sat down with Russia and with China and said, look, you know what, this unipolar world, it's not working. It's a myth anyway.
mm,
We'll slice it up, and you leave us to do what we
yeah,
want in our sphere in the Americas, and we'll leave Russia to do what it wants in its sphere, and we'll leave
mm,
China to do what it wants in its sphere. So you might, in 6 months' time, find actually that, yeah, Trump has got Venezuela and Cuba and possibly Greenland or even Canada.
mm,
So the Americas are more American, and that the war in Ukraine is done and dusted, with Russia having won the Donbass and all the rest of it,
Yeah.
and that China has taken Taiwan, which I think they're quite entitled to. It's Chinese. And
Yeah.
again, it's
Yeah.
nothing
I
to do with
agree.
us. It's an internal political quarrel. So
Yeah.
that would make the world a safer place. Spheres of influence where
Yeah.
the Russians understand that they can't go messing around in Cuba because it's on
Mm,
America's doorstep, but Ukraine is on Russia's doorstep. So the
yeah.
same goes both ways. So perhaps that's
Mm,
done and perhaps it'll be settled. But if that was the case, logically, Iran is in Russia's backyard. They've got a huge
yeah.
land border and it's a
Yeah.
Muslim country and they have potentially problems with Islam in Russia.
Mm,
Not in the way that we have and so on. And if they have, it'll be because the CIA and Mossad yet again weaponize Islamist extremism
yeah.
against an enemy. But they have
Yeah.
potentially got a problem there. So they've got this enormous land border. So Iran is Russia's backyard. So if a deal had been done, it should be that Trump huffs and puffs perhaps, but then backs off because Iran should be left to the Iranians to sort out. And if it is left to the
Mm,
Iranians to sort out, they will be close to Russia, which is fair enough because that's what they are. But
yeah.
I think the jury's out on it. Trump huffs and puffs
Mm,
and does outrageous stuff to make deals,
yeah.
and he's obviously a megalomaniac.
Mm,
So perhaps yet we'll see common sense. But if Trump were to do to Iran what they did to Syria
yeah.
and hand it over to people who are on the side of Israel and against Russia, especially, it could make the world a very, very dangerous place. Let us pray that actually he's huffing and puffing. And the latest, whereby he said, "Okay, they've said to me they're not going to hang the shopkeeper, so I'll
Yeah.
leave them alone." If that's the case, perhaps indeed he's done a deal with the other powers to leave them in their patches and leave America in it, so it would make the world a far better place.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it kind of doesn't escalate with Iran and it just kind of things go back to normal there. But yeah, interesting your take on China because I'm of the same opinion. They didn't really do anything in Libya either when that conflict was kicking off, and I think they had quite a lot of contracts with
That was,
Gaddafi.
yeah, they didn't. That was different because that was
Yeah,
before Putin was really in power. It was that
yeah,
Medvedev was the president at a time when Medvedev started off as a liberal,
yeah,
really on the side of the West and westernizing Russia. He appears, because of what they've suffered since, he appears now to have become a genuine Russian nationalist. I don't know if it's for
yeah,
show. It might just be for show, going along with Putin, but I think it's genuine, the things he says.
yeah,
I think now that it's different, but he lets them destroy Gaddafi because Russia was weak at the time and because he was a
yeah,
liberal who thought you could do a deal with the West. Russia
yeah.
is now much, much stronger. Medvedev and the whole Russian establishment is much more nationalist. So
Mm,
just because the old Russian order let that happen in Libya doesn't mean
yeah,
that it's the same people in charge now. So logically,
no,
they should fight the hell to keep Iran.
yeah,
And uh, the difference perhaps is that Iran is a serious level country which can defend itself in a way that
mm,
Syria wasn't. Syria was already a messed up balkanized state, really and
yeah,
truly, very, very vulnerable. So much harder for Russia to defend that than it would be to defend Iran. So
Iran.
I don't know what we're going to see. We might see some token strikes that don't change anything. In the end,
Mm,
in order to impose a coloured revolution in Iran, America will probably have to put boots on the ground
yeah,
and go
mm,
into a gigantic Vietnam.
yeah.
And I don't think that they'll do that. So perhaps in the end, it's just that political reality will impose common sense on Trump and the people around him.
Yeah, I hope so. And just briefly, I just wanted to touch base with you regarding China because I get a bit fed up of kind of watching like Nigel Farage and Rupert and even Rupert Lowe, who I do quite like Rupert
Mm.
Lowe, but they always say on their interviews, "Oh well, China's a real threat to the West," and part of me just thinks like, well, China's a peaceful country. It hasn't had a war since 1979. Whenever I listen to the Chinese diplomats, I feel much more kind of
Yeah,
a connection with them than I do Western diplomats. But not only that, I mean, okay, I suppose they are the biggest manufacturer in the world, but I just think that they are just really good businessmen, really, to be honest. I mean, they've taken advantage of Western stupidity. We
Hmm.
were the ones who decided
Yeah.
to sell off our industry. We were the ones who decided to sell off like our manufacturing base, and they came in and they took advantage of
Hmm.
that. But who are the stupid ones, really? It's not China.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, wondered what your take on
Yeah, I
China
I
was,
very much
really.
agree with that, Natasha. In that China would have been a threat to the whole world if they carried on having children at a normal rate. Because they've
Yeah,
had a 34-year policy of one child per family, they're now a
yeah.
demographic basket case, even worse than we are, as a matter of fact. A
Mm,
huge population, but it's crashing, it's rapidly aging, and it's going to crash as a population, big scale. So
yeah,
what's their answer to that? Britain's answer, or the West's answer, is just import people from Africa. It'll be fine. They're Africans, but they'll
mm,
come here, they'll become Brits. It's magic, our air and our soil. It's all nonsense. But China's answer to this is huge scale robotization and mechanization of its factories and looking
yeah,
for markets overseas. Now, there's two sorts of capitalism, capitalism and especially imperialism, have affected the world for the last 300 or 400 years. There's the
mm,
Western style imperialism, which fundamentally is go in and grab it. The
yeah,
British weren't quite so bad. In places like India, we also built railways, hospitals, universities, etc. But overall, we still grabbed the place's wealth. In Africa, we did even more so. The French, the Belgians, the Germans, when they were at it, and the Americans just looped the whole thing. The American post-war imperialism and colonialism is far worse. They don't even pretend to look after the natives. They just go in and
mm,
grab the uranium and so on.
yeah,
So that's the Western way of doing world business, was to find a weak country and loot it. The Chinese way has to be different because they're manufacturers and their system runs on selling the things they make to other people. And it used to be the
mm,
things the Chinese workers made. From now on, it's going to be the things the Chinese robots make, but they've got to sell them. And the only way they can sell those in other countries is if those other countries have a middle class, because it's the middle
yeah,
classes who buy the products of Chinese factories. So
yeah,
their way of working when they go into, say now, Afghanistan, or Pakistan, or even India, their way of working is actually to find ways to create, to boost up a local middle class who will then
mm,
buy Chinese goods.
yeah,
So it's a bastard thing to oppose if you're trying to be an industrial country, because they've got
mm,
these economies of scale, they're so much more efficient and so on. It's very difficult. But in terms of are they a threat to the world? No, they're not. They only want to
no,
trade with the world because
yeah,
that's how they make their money. They're not a threat to the world militarily because they haven't got any
mm,
young men, or not enough young men to go stomping around the world, and certainly not to go and occupy it and colonize it. They haven't got enough young families. So no, China's not a threat in the way that Farage and co say.
no,
I think there you're seeing a lot of there's various lobby groups, and again, people nowadays are all looking at the Zionist lobby group. It is an issue, but don't forget the lobby group of the military-industrial complex. Companies
yeah,
like Boeing and Lockheed and all the rest of it, they make
mm,
vast sums of money, not just out of war, but also out of the threat of war. And they do it
yeah,
primarily by giving fat backhanders, tens of thousands of dollars and so on, to individual politicians. And they
yeah,
fund the campaigns of individual politicians, and their think
yeah,
tanks fund and push politicians. And the
mm,
politicians have to talk about war because that's the only way they can justify spending billions of pounds and billions of dollars on military hardware, which probably is never even going to be used. It's a
no,
gigantic rip-off. And Farage and co say Farage is a capitalist. His party's in the hands and in the pockets of capitalists, and there's far more money to be made by saying, "Oh, look at the people over there; they're a threat. We've got to rearm." Than there
yeah,
is by saying, "People over there aren't a threat. You know what? We should find ways to trade with them, but we do have to find ways to protect our own industry." And the Chinese wouldn't worry about us protecting our own industry. They look at us and they think we're absolutely mad that we don't. So there's deals to be done if we were run by people who were sensible.
yeah. I just think I would like to see, going forward, just a move to kind of rational diplomacy. It's just something that
Indeed.
just don't see in government or even in the public domain in Britain at this point. I
Yeah.
just think it's insanity what we come out with a lot of the time. Really, just no, yeah. There's no push for kind of intelligent debate
No.
or
No, you're right.
discussion.
Yep.
It's really quite sad how much we've fallen as a nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your
On that
time. I
very
really
cheery
enjoyed
note.
our yeah. I really enjoyed this
Thank
conversation,
you,
and
Natasha.
yeah,
Been very
thank you
interesting.
for agreeing
Thanks very
to
much. Hope to come
talk
on
to
again
me.
sometime.
Thank you.
Cheerio.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.